Good afternoon. I'm Jenny Hall. I am the Outdoor Advertising Manager for those who do not know me. It's my pleasure to welcome you to today's webinar on outdoor advertising vegetation training. I have a few housekeeping items to go over before we go ahead and get started. So we're scheduled for 2 hours today. This includes time for the presentation and then also time at the end for questions and answers. In attendance today, we have several sign companies, vegetation contractors, outdoor advertising staff, environmental staff, and MoDOT roadside managers. We are recording today's webinar and we will place the recording on MoDOT.U for future reference. The webinar will also be added to our course catalog. All lines are muted during the presentation. The Q&A function will be open though, so I encourage you to place any questions in the Q&A pod. We will be monitoring these questions during the presentation to determine if we should break into the presentation for clarification. Otherwise, the questions will be answered at the end. For today's webinar, I'm pleased to introduce our speakers. We have Stacy Heckert. Stacy is the Outdoor Advertising Permit Specialist. She is our outdoor advertising specialist. She is the lead worker for the state for outdoor advertising, and she also covers Area 6, which is in the southeast area of the state. Her office is located out of Sykeston. We have Chuck Wills. Chuck is a senior roadside management specialist, and he oversees the roadside management program across the state. Then we also have Bree McMurray. She is an senior environmental specialist, and Bree oversees the Threatened and Endangered Species program within MoDOT. And outdoor advertising, roadside, and environmental all work together to ensure we have a successful outdoor advertising vegetation process at MoDOT. So again, as we go through the presentation, you may submit questions through the Q&A pod. All questions will be answered at the end of the presentation. At the end, you will also have an opportunity to use the raise your hand feature in WebEx, and we will unmute you in the order of the question received at that time. So there will be ample time for questions. And at this time, I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Stacy to begin the presentation.
Thanks, Jenny. Good afternoon, and thanks for joining me on this training. I'm going to talk about the vegetation rules and regulations for outdoor advertising. Next slide, Jenny. Missouri statutes allows for cutting and trimming of vegetation on highway right-of-way, which interferes with the effectiveness of or obscures a lawfully erected billboard. The application process. Applications must be submitted and approved prior to cutting, trimming, or spraying. The permit is issued to the sign owner. Minimum of $1,000 performance bond on file with traffic and highway safety, or a check for $1,000 per application. Liability insurance, site drawing showing distance from each sign face of the vegetation to be affected. Endangered Species Act checklist is required if application has marked to cut or trim trees from April 1st through October 31st. And if the permit is approved, it's good for 1 year. Types of vegetation removal. Mowing or brush hogging, avoid August 15th through October 31st. Trim trees April 1st through October 31st. Trees must be marked and must be done through a certified arborist. Trim trees November 1st through March 31st. This must be done through a certified arborist. Cut trees April 1st through October 31st. Trees must be marked. Cut trees November 1st to March 31st. And herbicides, spray only herbicides approved by MoDOT. And there's a reference to the REPG and the products that are on the approved list. The Endangered Species Act checklist. It prohibits trimming, cutting, or removal of trees that are considered suitable roosts for Indiana bats and northern long-eared bats is prohibited from April 1st through October 31st due to these species being under the Endangered Species Act. Applicants must submit a habitat assessment of the proposed cut area from a qualified consultant for consideration to trim or cut trees between April 1st and October 31st. Trees must be marked and photos included of the trees to be removed. Active construction or reconstruction areas. If the vegetation permit is located in an active project the applicant must receive approval from the contractor prior to performing any vegetation work on the right-of-way in the area under the vegetation permit. Information regarding active construction or reconstructive projects should be provided in to the vegetation permit under additional instructions. Cutting of vegetation. The area specialist or roadside manager will verify the cut area to ensure slope stability and safety concerns. Access to vegetation area must be from private property. At no time are workers allowed to park on the highway, pavement, shoulder, or grassy area while performing the work outlined in the permit. All workers within highway right-of-way shall wear approved safety apparel, including glasses and footwear. I will now turn over the presentation to Chuck for his portion.
Good afternoon, everyone. This is Chuck Wills. As Jenny pointed out, I'm the Senior Roadside Management Specialist for MoDOT out of Central Office, and I am also a certified arborist through the ISA, and have some certification with a company called EnviroCert that covers erosion control techniques and such. And what I'd like to do is cover some guidelines and concerns when doing work on MoDOT right-of-way. So here's some reasons we do tree removal or trimming on right-of-way. Generally, one of the big ones that we do is pre-construction clearing. That would be removal of the entire tree. There's a fair amount of utility line clearing and maintenance that's usually involves just trimming. Hazard trees, sometimes that are pose a hazard to the driving lane or safety. We take those out. That would be full removals. We do a fair amount of trimming, some removals to clear around highway information signs. And then the reason most of you are here on this call today is billboard visibility. Next slide. Go into some more of these. As Stacy referred to, the Code of State Regulations covers a lot of the regulations on tree removal and trimming on state right-of-way. But one of the other sources we go to is the Engineering Policy Guide, and I'm going to hit a few points within the Engineering Policy Guide in the next few slides. Next slide, please. Here are the particular guidelines I'd like to go into one by one. These 5, keep in mind there are many EPGs on the list, but I'm going to hit these 5 during the presentation here. Next slide. First one. The cutting of vegetation. The area specialist or roadside manager and/or will verify or will inspect the slope or the area that where the trees are going to be, where you've requested cutting or trimming. They're going to inspect those for the stability of the slope and safety concerns. And then, as previously mentioned, Stacy said the access is from private property only, and then it talks about the approved safety apparel also. Next slide. We request that when you do cut trees, the entire tree, that you cut the stump to ground level and treat the stump. The reason for doing that is that either you or MoDOT may come in and mow that area adjacent to the sign at a certain point. Maybe not, but if we do, or if you do, you don't want stumps standing above the ground level, posing a hazard to your equipment. I've have firsthand experience with that. Those can be very detrimental to gearboxes on brush hogs and tractor tires. So take your stumps down to the ground and treat them. We do not want stumps to be ground out. We just want them taken down to the level of the soil and left there. No grinding of stumps, except for very few certain cases. All grass, brush, and low-lying vegetation should be trimmed no less than 6 inches from the soil. So leave it at least 6 inches tall. If you are mowing or cutting brush, leave a little bit out there so we're not encouraging erosion to set in. That's another big concern. I'm going to talk more about that later on. And if you're working on a slope that's 3-to-1 or greater, we do not want any large equipment on those slopes, so you're pretty much restricted to hand trimming with chainsaws and handheld equipment. Next slide. Moving on to herbicides. This what we're seeing here is an application that was done in front of a sign previously, and it's very evident that was a glyphosate application done to basically eliminate all vegetation. It looks like a few individual specimens were untouched out there, but this use of glyphosate or a Roundup product should never ever happen. Because what's going to happen here, or what's likely to happen, is it's not a real steep area there, but if it were, we would probably see some erosion set in. But what I'm more concerned about, and actually you would be too, as a sign owner, is that when that type of application is done, where you kill everything, the grasses will not come back. What will come back is the weeds and the brush that tend to get a lot taller than the grass. So this, I can't think of any situation where this is going to be allowed or should be the objective. Keep Roundup to a very minimal use. The only place that I can see or that I can think of where we really want to see or encourage the use of a Roundup product with glyphosate is those areas where you have gravel or right around the base of a fence line or fence posts, or maybe a signpost or something, but just very minimal, right around the edge where it cannot be trimmed. But an application like this should have been done with, if you're going to cover an entire area broadcast, it should be done with a selective product, a selective herbicide. And there are many out there. It could have been a selective herbicide such as 2,4-D to take out the broadleaf weeds and brush in the area, or it could have been a combination of a plant growth regulator and a weed control. But the use of Roundup in this situation should, I can't ever think of a reason for doing that. I would never approve something like that. So use selective herbicides, and there are a lot of them on the market, and you can achieve a lot of good results out there with one of those products. Let's go to the next herbicide or next slide, please. Continuing on with herbicide, the only herbicides approved by the department's authorized representative may be used to trim or remove, and it's all handled under the Missouri Pesticide Use Act. You are required to have a certified commercial applicator if your company is doing work on the right of way using herbicides. You're required to have a certified commercial applicator, not necessarily doing the actual work, but within phone contact or supervisory role of that applicator. Restricted use herbicides may not be used. Use only general use herbicides, no restricted. Remember, selected herbicides are the herbicide of choice for the control of undesirable species, not the Roundup. I talked about that last bullet point there before. Roundup is not going to be approved very often, except for just a few little spot treatments here or there, or on gravel areas. Next slide. And I think we've talked about most of this. Some of it's reworded. All herbicides must be used in strict accordance with the manufacturer's instructions on the label. Follow all your label instructions. Again, no restricted use herbicides, only general use herbicides may be used. And the last bullet point I had not talked about before, but it talks about the use of that product, or the use of any herbicides on trees. Those trees or brush need to be taken down within 60 days of that application, and that allows enough time for the application to be effective, and then come in and take down the dead tree or dead brush. Next herbicide, or next slide, please. Another section of the EPGs involves trimming of trees. So trees of any size may be trimmed in accordance with the following guidelines. A tree may not have more than 1/3 of its canopy removed in a single operation. Please follow all National Arborists Association standards as a guideline to ensure trees are being pruned properly. Such things as the final pruning cut should be made along the natural branch collar and not flush with the trunk. Cannot repeat any of the any such trimming within 3 full years on hardwood species. In situations where pruning is to be done on a stand of trees, if you cannot distinguish individual trees, if the trees are dense enough, it might be best bet for us to consider the entire group of trees as being one large tree, and set some guidelines there as far as pruning. Brush over 6 feet that's approved for removal should be cut first, and the stumps treated with the herbicides. Next slide, please. Some mowing is being done out there on adjacent right-of-way to the billboards. Some is being done by you, and some is being done by MoDOT. Either way, we want to avoid mowing between the dates of August 15th and October 31st at a minimum. I would like to see all that mowing really be done one time in the springtime or very early summer. And so the longer you can avoid mowing, the better it's going to be. And the reason for avoiding the mowing, especially summer into fall, is that if you let those plants stand, it will encourage the maturing of the seeds of those native plants favorable for the pollinator species. And the pollinator species that we have out there are very important to us. I know a few years ago, World Foods actually did a side-by-side in their produce section of the value of pollinators to our society and to us as humans. And so what they did was they took their entire produce section and took a photo of it, filled to the brim with every type of produce that they had in stock, and then they removed all those products that were provided by pollination, in particular the pollinator species, not wind so much, but pollinator species. And by the way, there are approximately 4,000 pollinator species in the United States, native to the United States. So there's a lot of them out there. And anyway, they did side by sides, and the first slide that they showed, I should have had them on here maybe, but I found it very interesting. Anyway, the first slide was a jam-packed produce section with everything filled, and then they took away those products that were there, through pollination, and what was left was basically about a quarter to a third of the produce section was left, and it was mainly those products, those foods that were roots or similar products like beets and potatoes and things like that, carrots. So it wasn't real interesting. So just to point, pollinators are very important to our society and to our living. So let's help them out when we can. So next slide. There we go. The last EPG point I was going to point out is the illegal vegetation removal and damage to the right-of-way. The applicant will be held responsible for any damage. If illegal cutting or damage occurs, the area specialist will assess and photograph the location. They'll work with the outdoor advertising manager to prepare a letter to the permit owner, and then damages may come out of the performance bond. Next slide. So moving on to other MoDOT guidelines. Follow ISA trimming and cutting. I talked about some of that. Erosion control for any disturbed bare soil. I really encourage you to minimize, if not, minimize as much as you can any disturbed soil out there, because anything that is disturbed or bare after you've been there, it just opens it up to erosion. It may not look like a big area, but a small bare area in the wrong location can turn into a big erosion problem later on. We also want to maintain proper drainage, working on the right-of-way. Don't leave any logs or wood pieces laying in the ditches. Don't minimize any activity within the ditches, especially with heavy equipment, in order to maintain the integrity of the sides of the ditches. And when you are replanting in an area, as you sometimes do, we encourage the use of native grasses, trees, and forbs in those areas. And next slide, please. So these are some of the ISA trimming and cutting guidelines. They're pretty self-explanatory, but arborists adhering to the ANSI A300 pruning standard will not let any of these things happen. And once again, we do encourage you to use the pruning standards of the ISA. Next slide. All right, erosion starts out very small, but it can get quite large over a period of time. This is an actual shot of down on Branson at the top of the rock, and this wasn't there a number of years back, but it started to erode and fall in, and this thing is now hundreds of feet deep. It's very large. Some of you have probably seen it. It's quite large. And I just want to throw that out there to once again say, anytime you're working on state right of way, please minimize the bare soil or disturbed soil that you leave behind. If you do disturb soil, please reseed it or use some sort of erosion control technique, so we don't end up with the small problem becoming a large problem. I mean, we're probably not going to see something develop this big out there, but it doesn't take a lot sometimes to just stop a small problem when it's erosion. Simply just laying something on top of it, like a fabric, or if it's a larger area, a fabric of some sort, or there are a lot of other tools you can use, but let's just minimize the possibility of that happening. Next slide, please. So once again, trees already cut to ground level. I talked about that before. Not below and not ground out. In most cases, once in a while, if there's a reason, a necessary reason for grinding out of stuff, we will allow that. But in general, we just want them cut to the ground surface and treated and left as such. That way, the roots are staying in place and holding the soil in place. We talked about the other points before. Trim no less than, or mow no less than 6 inches tall to prevent erosion, and then hand trimming only on slopes greater than 3 to 1. Next slide. It's very important to maintain proper drainage on the right-of-way. The water over roadways is very dangerous to traveling motorists. I was actually made aware of that again just last week while I was on vacation. I went down to the Gulf Coast, and they've had a lot of rain down there. So much rain that even along the interstate, the median is standing water in the low-lying medians, and along both sides of the interstates, it's standing water, sometimes as far as you can see. And even in Mobile Bay area, some of the ramps on and off of the major highways were almost to the point where the water was lapping up to the driving lane. But water over roadways is very, very dangerous because of hydroplaning, and it's very difficult to tell how deep water is just by driving by or driving toward it. You don't really know how deep it is until you get into it. So it can be quite dangerous. So we want to ask you to remove all tree cuttings from the right of way. Leave no branches, log pieces, or cuttings in the ditches. Leave ditch banks undisturbed. Clear any cutting or debris from culverts or grates. Next slide. When you are replanting, native species are best suited to the area and will promote sustainability of the ecosystems in place. The Missouri Department of Conservation is a great resource for knowledge and help when planning and planting. And we encourage you to utilize Grow Native and their supporting organizations, businesses, when choosing plantings and replacement plants. Next slide. Bree is going to talk about endangered species in just a few minutes after I turn it over to her. But on the other side of that, I wanted to point out that there are a number of invasive species that we encounter on the vegetation side. And many of you have heard of this, of the pear issue. So what about all I want to say about this is we've got several invasive species out there, the pear being one, honeysuckle being another, and there are quite a few others on the list, but this one in particular, we would encourage you to take them out if they are, if there's question whether they're whether they are a problem or going to be a problem for you, they're probably going to be a problem, and they're definitely a problem for us, and they're a problem for all the citizens. So let's take them out wherever we see them, unless it is in a clearly in a landscape planting that was installed on purpose. But there aren't very many of those. There's a few down in southeast Missouri, and a few others in some of the metro areas, but for the most part, these trees are all across the state and quite an invasive problem and getting much worse. So let's encourage taking those out. Next slide. An integrated approach is always best when considering vegetation management or working in vegetation management. We don't, at MoDOT, we try to utilize an integrated approach using mechanical, chemical, cultural, and even biological controls. I know most of you folks being in the industry that you're in, you're probably only going to use maybe 2 of those tools, mechanical and chemical. Maybe you're only cutting, maybe you're only using mechanical, but utilize or try to utilize a number of tools available to you. It's not all about just cutting, or it's not all just about spraying. It's not all just, there are other things to use. A cultural tool would be encouraging or planting the proper plant in the right location. And you probably won't run into biological controls, but we actually do use 2 biological controls on MoDOT right-of-way. We have for years to control musk thistle and spotted knapweed, and they are quite effective. So if you get the chance and you haven't delved into some of these other tools, maybe you might want to try using an additional tool. Next slide. So before we go out and actually do a project, I always encourage even our own folks to do a risk assessment. Well, that's whether you're cutting or spraying or almost any project. Do a risk assessment on the project before you go out there. And when I talk about risk assessment, I throw this slide in there quite a lot. This was actually had the opportunity to take this picture myself. This wasn't pulling off the internet or anything. And the irony here is that this is an older home which has been turned into the office of an insurance company or an insurance agent. And the irony, I guess, is that that insurance companies are in the business of measuring risk and doing risk assessment. And here they left this decrepit tree out in front of their property. A windstorm came through and dropped it on the roof of the porch there. So I can't say that the insurance agency did a very good risk assessment there, but I'm not sure what they were trying to, what the end game was there, but it didn't turn out well, I don't believe. So do a risk assessment each and every time before you go out the door for every project. What is it going to be? Is it going to be to my advantage to do this project today, or do I need to wait to another day, or do it a different way? And the next slide. Once again, just when you are out there and you are working, you've done your risk assessments. Keep the environment in mind, and be a good steward of our, not just your, but our environment, everyone's. And with that, I think that's my last slide, and I'll turn it over to Bree for the endangered species.
All right, thanks, Chuck. My name is Bree, and I work in the central office within the design division I'm an environmental specialist specializing in endangered species issues. So that's what I do for MoDOT. And generally, we're doing assessments on the construction jobs, but part of being involved in this training, certification, qualification type training, is to maintain consistency across all areas of MoDOT. So one of the biggest parts of my job and the other biologists in our office is to conduct suitability assessments for bat trees around the state. So whenever we're clearing trees, we're doing an assessment of whether or not it's suitable for bats and if that's going to restrict our clearing dates for any trees that need to be removed. Mostly this is going to fall under the purview of federally funded jobs where we are looking into Fish and Wildlife Service approval of the jobs in order to spend the federal dollars. Obviously, outdoor advertising and sign maintenance and visual tree removal activities, they're not going to fall under federally funded, but like I said, to maintain consistency, we're trying to do the same thing across all areas. We've given similar consideration to MoDOT maintenance when we're doing hazard tree clearing, after blowdowns, or we've got dead trees overhanging roads, we need site distance clearance. And we also have been working over the last several years with right-of-way access for any kind of permit through traffic, whether that's to put in a new driveway, if it's to, remove invasive trees along, a zone of private and MoDOT right-of-way. So we're working with our traffic management specialists as well. And we're even ramping up to start giving a similar training like this to Ameren Electric. That was in the plans about a year ago. And of course, everything got sidelined a bit, but we were starting to have talks with them when we were talking with outdoor advertising at the same time. So we're looking at, making sure that our tree clearing policy is consistent message all through MoDOT. Next slide, please. Okay, so why should we be concerned with active season tree clearing? As Jenny said earlier, Stacy said earlier, we are following Fish and Wildlife Service guidance. The Endangered Species Act protects about 36 to 38 species in Missouri. 3 of those are bat species, and 2 of those bat species, the northern long-ear bat and the Indiana bat, are forest dwelling species in our state. So the active season is going to be anytime they're out on the landscape. Both of these species hibernate in caves in the winter, and that's why tree clearing for anything over 3 inches in diameter is going to be allowed during the winter time because the bats are not out on the landscape. So when we say active season tree clearing, we're talking about spring, summer, fall, when they are going to be using trees out on the landscape. Both species could occur statewide. So this isn't just part of the state that we're concerned about, which is why common activities or common policies across all practices is needed for MoDOT. To take, harm, or harass any federally listed species with a federal action can be interpreted as take. If you don't have the proper permits in place, if you don't have the proper approvals, construction projects can be sidelined if you have not gone through all of your clearances. Like I said, that's probably not going to ever come up for federal actions for the type of clearing that we're talking about with outdoor advertising and roadside maintenance, but we just want to make sure that we're doing everything the same, and any person that you ask within MoDOT is going to give you the same message. Next slide, please. Mostly what we're concerned about, so these bats are using the forest. So the biggest concern is going to be when they're roosting, when they are not moving, when they're resting in trees. So we call that roosting habitat. The maternity habitat, when they're out in the forest, they could have 1 to several maternity trees that they use and move around nightly or weekly. So primarily that's going to consist of live or dead hardwood species for the most part, which have shingle-like bark. So that's going to be something that provides space underneath bark that's peeling or curling up, or for dead trees or damaged trees. It could be any spaces between the bark and the wood, cavities, crevices, other splits in the bark. And I'll give some, you'll see some visual examples here in a little bit. The removal of those suitable summer roost trees at any time of the year may have an adverse effect on these species. So any active season tree clearing is going to require that you do the habitat assessment for all those trees 3 inches in diameter and above. That 3 inches comes directly from U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service guidance for the range of tree sizes that either one of these species could use. So there is a backup. That's not just arbitrary. Next slide, please. And all of this language that's coming from MoDOT Environmental that goes onto our federal projects, it's pulled directly into the Endangered Species Checklist that ODA has for you to use. So trimming, cutting, and removing of trees 3 inches or greater in diameter. Measured, that's the diameter breast height, if you're familiar with that terminology, measured at a point 54 inches above the ground, that are considered suitable. All of that is restricted between April 1 through October 31. I will point out too that Chuck was talking about limbing and trimming trees. So that 3-inch diameter is also going to apply to that. If you're not actually going to cut down any trees, but you've got some pretty large limbs that you need to remove, that 3-inch diameter restriction is going to apply there too. Next slide, please. Okay, so we've gone through, you've seen, you're probably familiar with, many of you, the responsibilities both from the applicant and the approval side of things. There's a permit required for improvements for ground disturbance or tree clearing. ODA has their standard approval process, and here in the last year to 2 years, they have been including as a standard requirement this 3 inches in diameter and greater, that you clear the trees in the winter across the board. If you can meet this requirement, then you just stop. That is part of your permit application. If you're not going to do any active season tree clearing, you can do all of your tree clearing of those trees above a certain size in the winter, then you don't need to do the checklist. So you can stop. But if you are requesting active season, then you have to go through the checklist guidelines. You need to provide photos. You need to provide the mapping of the location of where your tree clearing is going to be. You're probably going to have to mark trees that you actually want to take down. And that has to be reviewed by your outdoor advertising specialist in your area. Follow-up site visit is going to be included. That will probably be done either by the outdoor advertising specialist or the roadside specialist in that area, potentially both. So you want to make sure that you're being very accurate when you're doing your assessments. And again, we'll go through here in another slide or two how to do those assessments. Next slide, please. Contractor responsibilities. So that's being part of this training today is part of your qualifications for being able to make the call, whether you have suitable bat trees or not. So for active season tree clearing, you're going to have to certify that you do not have suitable summer roost trees. So you're going to be the one making the call and signing the piece of paper that's attesting that you don't have any suitable trees on site. Follow the checklist. Like I said, provide the photos to justify the size of trees that you're clearing, the description of the trees, the condition that they're in, the location. Your certification comes with your signature. So therefore, the assessment and the attestation must be somebody who has completed this training. And ODA will be keeping track of those folks that qualify to make that call. Next slide, please. Okay, so how do you conduct a bat tree habitat assessment? Number one, first and foremost, and we deal with this all across MoDOT, you actually need to be on site. It's going to be difficult to get a good representation if all you're doing is an aerial photo or if you're using Google Earth. I'll show you here at the end. I'll talk a little bit at the end about an example of using Google Earth. You need to really be on site and visually assess everything that you need to clear for your project. You need to get photos of trees that are coming down so that you can accurately attest that none of them are suitable. You're going to look for characteristics of the suitable trees that, like we talked about, the live or dead hardwood trees that have the shingle-like bark, something that provides the space for bats to be underneath. The reason we don't give you like a list of tree species is because what we're looking for is the characteristics, the condition. You could have a live white oak tree that really doesn't have the peeling bark on it. It's not mature enough, or it's in a condition where it just doesn't grow those overlapping plates of bark. So we're not going to tell you across the board all white oaks and black locust and shagbark hickory have to be taken down. It really depends on the characteristics of the trees that you're removing in their setting. So we want you to be on site in order to get those good and up-to-date photos and descriptions of what you're removing. Next slide. So when you've completed your habitat assessment, you're either going to attest that, nope, you don't have any suitable trees. You'll sign the checklist, you turn in all of your supporting documentation plus your permit number, and ODA specialist is going to approve that for active season tree clearing. If you do have suitable trees, well, you're not going to sign that form. You just submit your application. You're going to default to clearing trees in the winter as you would just as if you'd never gone out to do the assessment. So any suitable trees on site means you're going to default into the winter tree clearing anyway. Can you go back one slide, please, Jenny? Sorry. There we go. The picture here is an Indiana bat. So this is like a natural condition in a live tree. This is a shagbark hickory tree. And if you think about, if you can slide your thumb, like hold your thumb up from your fist, if your thumb will slide between, two pieces of bark, or between the tree and the wood, if it's a dead tree, the bark and the wood, I'm sorry, then a bat can get in there. Our bats folded up with their wings folded, roosting vertically underneath of the bark, are going to be about the size of your thumb. So if you can imagine that size as being the cavity space or the width that of the clearance in the bark and the wood that bats can be using, that's what we're wanting to know. Do you have those characteristics? Next slide. And this picture on this page is a northern long-eared bat in a tree cavity. So if you think about, if your thumb will fit up inside of a tree cavity, or you can visualize that space, can hide a bat-sized little organism. If a mouse will fit in it, a bat will fit in it. If a bird will fit in it, a bat will fit in it. So when we're looking at these kind of tree cavities or knot holes or a lightning strike split or something like that, they don't have to be very big in order to be suitable for bats. Next slide, please. Okay, so these next two slides, and these are my last ones, I'm going to give you kind of an example. So if this is kind of like use your imagination going left to right. So let's pretend that you need to do tree clearing in order to, we'll say, put in a new billboard. And the tree clearing you're going to do is at the back of this photo on the left-hand side. So you're looking through private property, and beyond the trees in the background, that's first picture is where you need to do your tree clearing, where you're going to plant your sign. So if this is a picture that you take, I can't tell a whole lot. Your outdoor advertising specialist reviewing this can't tell a whole lot from this picture. What exactly are you clearing? Where are your limits going to end? The picture in the middle is a little bit better, but we've got two dead trees. So if this is what you're sending and you're attesting we don't have any suitable habitat, you might get a surprise in the field when somebody goes out to visit on site and says, well, yes, actually you do have suitable habitat, because in the third picture, it's taken from a little bit different vantage point of one of those dead trees, the red circle is around the one with suitable habitat. It's a little difficult to see in this picture, but about 1/3 down from the top of the picture, you can see the bark is a little bit lighter. That's actually a dead tree with the bark come away. So you're seeing the wood exposed. So if you are taking the picture number 1 and turning that in as your site assessment and saying we don't have anything suitable, you might get a surprise when you go out to do the field assessment or whoever's approving your permit goes out to do the field assessment and they come up with a different assessment than what you did. This is why, again, it's important to get up close and personal to your subject. You need to walk the area, you need to get good pictures and mark trees that actually have to come down. Next slide, please. So this is just one last reiteration. The Endangered Species Act checklist that ODA has, these pictures are included. This is just blown up, so you can kind of see what we're talking about. Live trees, again, not all, but it could be examples like shagbark hickory or large black or honey locust or large white oak. Picture number 1 there, I'm thinking actually that's a white oak. So a mature tree, you can see how the bark kind of starts to peel or curl, and that would provide habitat as a live tree for bats. Dead, dying, or damaged trees that have space between the outer bark and the inner wood, that could be like in the second picture there, it is a dead tree and the bark is just starting to come off. The middle picture, that could be a live tree with a lightning strike. So it's got damage on the tree is still live, but you've still got those spaces. If you look at the top of the picture where you can see the wood exposed, if you can imagine getting your thumb underneath of that slab of bark, well, so can a bat get under there. So that is suitable. And then we've got live or dead trees that have cavities or cracks or limbs that are broken or splits in the wood because it's growing in an unnatural condition. Those last 2 pictures, the 4th and 5th picture there, cavities in trees or splits in the wood or deep knot holes. Those are all places where bats could be. So just reiterating again, good idea to get up close and personal, take a walk, actually look at every single tree that you need to remove for your project, especially if you want to do the, you're banking on doing active season tree clearing. If you've got these trees, that's not going to be allowed. That concludes my part of it. So I'm going to turn it back over to Jenny, and we're going to start answering any questions and anything from the chat that you all may have.
Okay, thank you all for the great presentation. As Bree said, we will begin taking questions. At this time, I do not see any questions in the Q&A pod. If you do have a question, you can use the raise your hand tool in the WebEx, and Deanne will be monitoring that to see if we have any questions there.
I do not see any hands raised, Jenny.
Okay, thanks, Deanne. As you kind of think about all of this, though, if you have any additional questions at all, please feel free to reach out to your area outdoor advertising permit specialist, and they will be able to help you and answer any of those questions. I hope today's presentation provided a better understanding of the outdoor advertising vegetation process, and just want to thank you for participating. As a wrap up to this webinar, we will be registering MoDOT employees' participation in MoDOT-U. We will manually track participation from the industry for the bat habitat checklist. I believe we do have one person who called in by phone. If you would please, if you did call in by phone, if you would send Deanne an email at deann.weberg, W-I-E-B-E-R-G, at modot.mo.gov. She can get you registered for this course then and get you on that list for us. And then if you're already signed into WebEx with your name, Deanne has recorded those as well. If you did not catch that email address for Deanne, she is the one you would have received the invitation from also, or her phone number is 573-522-1725. And here is a list of all of our contacts there. Deanne's contact is on there as well. And we'll get you on the list for that. And this concludes our webinar for today. And thank you oh, hold on, I think we do have one question in the chat pod now. We had a question if this qualifies for the bat habitat bat training habitat? And if not, how else is certification granted? So yes, this does qualify for you to be able to fill out the bat habitat checklist and submit that if you do want to do active tree clearing or trimming during the summer. What you'll do is we will provide you with that checklist. You could submit that with your vegetation application along with the documentation of the photos to the outdoor advertising permit specialist. And then once they receive that with the information, they will go out, complete an inspection with either them or roadside or a combination of the two to determine if you would be able to cut during the summer months. So thank you for that question. Okay, I do not see any other questions in the chat pod or in the Q&A pod. So at this time, that does conclude our webinar, and thank you again.